The Lady Werewolves of modern-day New Orleans. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've gathered together a few different narratives for you from acquaintances of mine who claim to have had contact with female werewolves, who are also powerful business people in the southern United States. I don't know that any of this is true, since I've never been aware of talking to a werewolf, whether male or female. And so to me, this is all technically just hearsay. It's fascinating hearsay, though, which I've worked really hard the past few weeks to throw together for you. I think you should present it as for entertainment only, though, because if it turned out to be true, then you would be making enemies of some powerful werewolf women. And nobody wants to do that. Now again, I don't know if this first part is true or apocryphal, but I've heard this same sort of origin story about this phenomenon at least 4 different times, with only minor variations between each version. It's supposed to have happened either in the late 50s or early 60s or early 70s, depending on the storyteller. But the basic narrative remains the same. A woman from a big city to the east came out to New Orleans on vacation, spending money buying tourist stuff to give her family and friends when she got back home. Because of the events which were about to unfold, though, she would decide to stay permanently in New Orleans instead. One day during the lady's tourist travels, she was inside the New Orleans Historic Voodoo Museum when a momentous event happened. If that part is true, then it could have happened no earlier than 1972, which is when that museum opened. Other versions of the story have this happening at a curio or clothing shop, either of which could be presumed to have closed long ago. In any case, in every version, the lady got bumped into by a gentleman stranger who proved to be quite charming and memorable. After a brief but presumably flirtatious conversation, the lady departed that establishment to have lunch in town by herself. There she found her thoughts drifting back to that mysterious, yet friendly stranger. Later that day, when perusing items in a different shop, most often but not always named as the Marie Laveau House of Voodoo, the lady and gentleman ran into each other again. This time the young man showed that he knew a lot about everything magical or voodoo, with a specialty on all kinds of different werewolf types, both American and French. This fascinated the young lady from the big city. She had come to New Orleans looking for an adventure, and here was this bizarre yet handsome gentleman offering one to her. The different versions of the stories all converge to say that the young duo walked to Jackson Square, and that is supposed to be the official birthplace of their plots and plans. That was where the man promised the woman to turn her into a shape-shifting power animal creature, not by biting her, but by using sorcery. And that was where she later turned the first of her friends into her new kind of humanoid, the wolfen kind, that would destroy their razors if they tried to shave under their armpits. This werewolf lady mafia isn't something you generally hear people talking about directly. Exactly. But when people tell you stories about their troubles in New Orleans, you can sometimes see these lady werewolves lurking in the back of the narrative, staring down from the darkness and causing bad things to happen. For instance, I know a very nice lady that I'll call Carla. She devoted much of her time and effort trying to help improve her neighborhood in New Orleans, and then one day she decided to run for a local office. Carla didn't know that she was working to unseat a werewolf candidate at first, but she learned the hard way that it's a bad idea to oppose these ladies. Here's Carla's story told in her own words. I never would have believed it if it hadn't happened to me. The whole ordeal started last year when I decided to run for a local office in New Orleans. I was passionate about making a difference in my community, and I was ready to fight for change. I had a solid platform, I had a dedicated team, and at first I was well received at local events. But as my campaign gained momentum, strange things started to happen. My social media pages were flooded with negative comments and fake news stories smearing me, saying unspeakable things about me that just weren't true. My campaign materials were vandalized, and my supporters were harassed. It was like everyone was against me, and I couldn't figure out why. As the election drew closer, I became desperate. I hired extra security. I spent more money on advertising, and I even reached out to influential businesswomen for endorsements, but nothing seemed to work. On election night, I lost by a landslide. This was devastating to me. I couldn't believe I'd put so much time, effort, and money into something like this, only to come up less than empty-handed, with terrible things now attached to my reputation, stapled on by miscreants. But miscreants run the world, as this ordeal taught me. Or so I thought, at least. Soon after my election fell, I received a strange invitation in the snail mail. It was a handwritten note from a woman, who I will call Olivia, inviting me to a special event that night. In spite of my better judgment, I decided to attend. I showed up at the address listed on the invitation, which turned out to be an old mansion in the French Quarter. The place was decorated with Halloween decorations, and I could hear faint music and laughter coming from inside. As soon as I walked through the door, I knew something was off. The party-goers were all women, all dressed in black, with intricate jewelry and tattoos. They were all mingling with each other, chatting and laughing. But as soon as they saw me, everybody stopped and turned to stare. Suddenly, Olivia appeared in front of me, her eyes glinting with an unfamiliar light. "Welcome," she said. "We've been waiting for you." I was too taken aback to say anything. Olivia led me through the party, introducing me to other women who all eyed me suspiciously. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that I had stumbled into a secret society that I had no business being a part of. I eavesdropped on several conversations, and they all seemed to be talking about food. Only it didn't seem that they were trading recipes. It was more like they were just describing eating meat to each other. It was always meat, and the conversations were about the sensual nature of tasting, chewing, and digesting. It was never about chocolate or wine. It was always about meat. As I listened more closely, I was nauseated to realize that these women all enjoyed raw meat, and they enjoyed discussing how much they enjoyed their raw meat, too. A lady came over to me and introduced herself as Melissa or Marissa or something like that. She told me she'd been transforming for half a year and asked how long it was for me. I thought she was asking me if I was a trans individual, but her phrasing was especially confusing. When I didn't answer, Marissa or Melissa thought I was being rude and said something to that effect before storming off and leaving me alone again by a window. I decided to spend some time looking out at the trees in the sky. At least those still made sense to me. And then I saw it. The full moon, rising in the sky outside the window. It was then that everything clicked into place. The women around me, the discussion of transformation, the strange energy in the air. It was all because they were werewolves. Female werewolves dressed in business suits and pearls, but werewolves nonetheless. Olivia, our hostess, passed me, and for the first time I noticed that her eyebrows met in the middle. How do you not notice something like that? Had her eyebrows always been so bushy? They couldn't have been. Olivia paused to chat with me, but found me staring at her eyebrows, too confused to have polite conversation. "Please enjoy yourself," Olivia said, before disappearing into the crowd. I was petrified, but I also couldn't help feeling intrigued. These women weren't the vicious monsters that I'd seen in movies. They were refined, intelligent, and seemed to have a strong sense of community. Of course, they also enjoyed raw meat, and had just used a series of dirty tricks to scuttle my plans to run for office, but, nobody's perfect. As the night went on, I talked to several of the women, and they shared their stories with me. They were all successful businesswomen who had once been like me, fighting for change in their communities. But when they encountered obstacles, they turned to their true identities as werewolves. They had a secret society that helped them with their challenges. They had a secret world that they could turn to in their times of need. They told me about their daily lives, the struggle to hide their identities, to balance their professional lives with their identities as werewolves. And as the night wore on, I couldn't help but feel a sense of solidarity with these women. Before I knew it, the sun was rising and the party was winding down. I said goodbye to the women I had met and left the mansion. As I walked back to my car, I couldn't help but feel conflicted. I had just enjoyed myself at a party thrown by a group of female werewolf business leaders, and it was nothing like the horror movies had led me to expect. But then I thought about my campaign, the harassment, and the negativity that had surrounded it. I still couldn't ignore the feeling that the group of women had been behind it. They were incredibly powerful, and now I knew they could literally turn into werewolves. Torn between my curiosity and my fear, I didn't really know what to do. Should I stay away from them, or try to join them? I had no idea which way to navigate in this secret world filled with powerful women who can turn into werewolves. Only time will tell what's next for me, so I guess that's mostly all I can report to you at this point. Back to you. I've got an acquaintance in her 20s who told me in passing that she used to date a rich son of a werewolf. I asked her if she meant that as a euphemism, or in a literal sense, and she told me the following story, which she has kindly written down for all of you to hear me read. I know most people don't believe me when I say I dated a man whose mother was a werewolf, so I don't admit it in public too often. Not when I'm sober, anyway. It's a crazy story, I know, but it's true. His mother was a powerful businesswoman in New Orleans, and she had this secret that she kept from the world. I only found out about it because of what happened when he and I were out on Bourbon Street one night. It was a warm summer evening, and my boyfriend had suggested that we head out to a few bars in New Orleans. I was excited and looking forward to a good time, but little did I know what I would experience that night would haunt me forever. Or at least from then till now. We started out by hitting up a few different bars, dancing and drinking the night away. Everything seemed normal enough until we found ourselves on the outskirts of the city where things were much quieter. We stumbled upon a bar that looked like it could have been there for ages, since before we were born. It had an old wooden door and a closed sign hanging on it. Everything else on the block was closed and desolate looking at that hour too, so I wanted to get out of there before something bad happened. It didn't even make sense that we were there when I look back on it, but we were very loose to be certain. And it was New Orleans, where illogical things can often seem totally logical, especially on one of those magical nights there, which this night was. So I trusted my guy, he was a local, and I held myself tight and close to him in that creepy area. My boyfriend knocked on the door, and after a few moments of silence, it creaked open to reveal a dimly lit interior. This was a small restaurant, and it was alive and active, in spite of the closed sign and the decrepit exterior. I looked around and saw that there was seating for only a couple dozen people, maybe. The atmosphere was cozy and intimate. We took a seat in one of the booths in the back of the room. A tall old man with bushy white hair coming out of his ears approached us and spoke in a thick European accent that at first we didn't understand. I was afraid that he was an insane person who was going to rob us or hurt us, but eventually I came to understand that he was the waiter. We ordered a few cocktails that he recommended. I was told that cocktails were the official drink of New Orleans by my classmates back east before I came out there. As we sat there sipping our drinks, I noticed a woman sitting in one of the booths across from us. She was middle-aged but attractive, dressed in a stylish suit with a knee-length pencil skirt and pumps, like she was at her day job. She had her hair pulled back in a tight, severe bun, and she was staring right at me. I couldn't help but feel uneasy under her intense gaze, but I tried not to let it bother me. The woman seemed to be deep in thought, almost like she was calculating something. I watched her for a few minutes longer before my attention was drawn away by the sound of a glass shattering. I turned back to the woman to see that she had transformed into a werewolf during that half second when my eyes were averted. I'm not kidding. It happened that fast. But I think somehow she could only make that change if I wasn't looking at her. Maybe that means it was a trick or illusion somehow. But it reminds me of stuff I've heard physics majors talk about at lunch at my last school. Like, light is either made up of particles or of waves, depending on whether you're paying attention to it or not. Or something like that. The gut feeling I had in that instant was that the secret to these ladies and their kind of werewolfism was that they had caught on to the understanding that the universe is more like a thought or a bit of imagination than it is a solid or real thing. Like, you know how some people say that the world is a computer simulation, that we're all sort of living in a Grand Theft Auto game, but with better sound and graphics, and better drugs too. Well, this was one of those moments where it felt like I was in GTA, and this other player in that restaurant just used a cheat code to become a werewolf at the table across from us. In fact, I couldn't even call her a businesswoman anymore. Nah, she had changed her GTA skin, I guess, because I was looking where she had been, and I was seeing a monster. This creature was terrifying, with gnarled teeth and glowing eyes. It looked like it could rip my head off with one swift bite. My boyfriend had seen the transformation too, but instead of running away, like a rational person, he tried to talk to the werewolf. In hindsight, that probably wasn't the best idea, but he almost seemed to be acting like he knew this creature from somewhere else. All hell broke loose as the werewolf began to thrash about, destroying anything and everything in its path. My boyfriend and I were quickly ushered out of the establishment by the old waiter and some other patrons, but not before I caught a glimpse of the werewolf's human form once again. It was the woman who had been staring at me, her hair now wild and unkempt, her suit torn and tattered. She looked like she was in a trance, almost like she didn't remember what had just happened. My boyfriend told me to stop staring, and he dragged me away from that scene, not admitting until we were outside that the woman that we saw transform was his own mother. After that night, my boyfriend and I broke up. It was just too much for me to handle, knowing that his mother was a werewolf, and that I could potentially witness something like that again. It was a difficult decision for me. Breaking up with a rich guy when I was broke, I knew it was for the best. I never saw that woman again after that night, but I can't help but wonder, now that I'm back east, what has become of her and her son. Is she still out there, terrorizing the citizens of New Orleans? Has she been able to learn to control her transformation? Or is she still completely unaware of it, the way she seemed to be after returning to human form that night? And the guy I was dating, if he knew all this about his own mother, why did he let her roam around New Orleans alone and unprotected from her random transformations? I wonder sometimes if he had similar problems. After all, he was her son. I never got the answers to those questions, but the memory of that night still haunts me to this day. I know it sounds crazy, but I swear it's true. I dated a man whose mother was a werewolf, and I once saw her transform right before my very eyes. It's a pretty messed up story, I admit, but it's one that I will never forget. So there you've heard two different people both whisper about a secret society of shape-shifting werewolf women inside New Orleans. Now that's hard enough to accept, but hold my beer, because I've got more. You see, it seems that there's more than one group of women identifying as werewolves maneuvering for power in that area of the world. When my friend, who I will call Stella, came to me with her story, I was surprised that it took place in St. Bernard, outside of New Orleans, and the women involved do not sound like the same ones we were just discussing. Let Stella tell it her own way. Then I'll come back afterward. I've never believed in the supernatural. Vampires, werewolves, ghosts, they were all just stories I heard as a kid. That was, until I was brought to a secret meeting of female werewolves. Now I'm a believer. It all started when I was visiting my friend's aunt in St. Bernard, Louisiana, which is just outside of New Orleans. I had heard about the New Orleans werewolf lore, but I never expected to encounter it in real life. Okay, so my friend's aunt was a strange woman. Her house was old and creaky, and the atmosphere was eerie. But I tried to ignore the strange feeling in my gut, and I shrugged it off as the old house getting to my head. So one day I was sitting in the living room, sipping on a cup of hot tea, while listening to my friend's aunt talk about her interest in the occult, when she mentioned something that struck me. She talked about a secret society of female werewolves that gathered in St. Bernard. I felt shivers go down my spine, but I couldn't help being intrigued. She had connections in this society, and before I knew it, I was invited to attend their next meeting. I won't lie, I was terrified. I didn't know what awaited me, and I was scared that I would end up the prey for these werewolves. However, my curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to attend the meeting. And so it was. On a quintessentially dark and stormy night, my friend's aunt drove me to a nondescript house right on a main road in St. Bernard. It's not like it was off in the woods or anything, but the building did have an odd aura surrounding it. Even though it was right next to happy-looking family homes, it almost sucked the light and the air out of the space it occupied. You know, it looked tidy, but it looked unlived in, or vacant. If it weren't for the faint light coming out of the window, I wouldn't have guessed that someone would even be inside there, or would want to be. We parked the car, and I shivered as we made our way into the ordinary, bland, forgettable, and yet somehow terrifying house. Once inside, I was greeted with a peculiar sight. A group of women, all in their late 20s to early 30s, sat around the table discussing their plans. At first glance, they seemed like any other group of women, but there was something odd about them. They had an animalistic quality to their eyes, and their words were sharp and to the point. I sat quietly in the corner, trying to avoid their gazes, but I couldn't help overhearing their conversation. They were discussing their plans to overpower the male-dominated society of New Orleans, and I couldn't help but feel tempted to join their cause. Power has always been a weakness for me, and joining these werewolves seemed like the ultimate power move. One of the women noticed me sitting in the corner and called out to me. They welcomed me to their group, and I couldn't help but feel a jolt of excitement rush through me. They offered me the chance to become one of them, to become a werewolf like them. At first I was tempted to join, to become a powerful being and rule the city of New Orleans. But as my mind cleared up, I couldn't help but feel disturbed by the thought. Joining their society meant losing my humanity, losing everything that made me human. I could hear Dr. McCoy yelling at Mr. Spock to be more human in my head, and soon Old Bones had defeated the Vulcan in my internal argument. I decided to give up the money and remain human. I could imagine Captain Kirk approving of my decision, and then hitting on me, and I've always made my internal decisions based on which choice would get Captain Kirk to flirt with me more. Realizing I was too intimidated by these werewolf women to risk rejecting their offer to their faces, I opted to be a big chicken about the whole thing. I quietly made my way to the door and snuck out of the house. The storm had calmed down, and I made my way back to my friend's aunt's house, unharmed. I never went back to that society of female werewolves, but the experience never left me. I can't help but remember their animalistic eyes, and the power they had over their surroundings. It was a power that seemed tempting at first, but upon thinking about it, I realized it was an evil that I couldn't be a part of. The experience changed me, and I could never return to my normal life. That night in St. Bernard, I learned that there's more to the world than what meets the eye. There are secrets lurking behind every corner, and some of those secrets are probably better left unexplored. It fills me with wonder and dread at the same time. There's so much more to know and learn, but it's also more dangerous to learn real truth than they ever told us in public school. Well, that seems like a pretty good place to end this email and this video. Is this all true? Again, maybe not. I mean, how could it be? And how long exactly has it been since those ladies were running things here in New Orleans? They don't mean to imply that this might still be going on, do they? All I can say is, if you run for office in rougarou territory, wear garlic around your throat, just in case.
Everybody wants a wooden cat. The scary stories, beanie hat. Everybody knows it's a natural fact. The scary stories, beanie hat. Link is in this video's description if all goes according to plan. Available in black, which is like every color all at once, man.
Whether you're high or whether you're low, you gotta say thanks to Philo. Please join me in thanking tonight's executive producer, Philo, for making this episode possible. Philo sent us a nice super chat, and we're quite grateful. If you would like to help us stay online and enjoy perks in return, then check out what our international TV spokesmongrel, Henry Lee Dogman, has to say. Hank. Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that when it cuts off after I think 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.